Okay, one of the things that we have to remember about AIDS, about HIV, is that it started out in the gay community. And because it started out in the gay community, and this was back in the 1980s, and in the 1980s, homosexuality was not as readily acceptable as it is today. One of the problems that we saw, especially initially, was that everybody was dying of HIV. The people that contracted HIV, a lot of them were dying of AIDS. And one of the reasons that we discovered, and actually we're going to see some of the research that they were talking about, one of the reasons was because of depression. HIV, and it turns out that HIV makes people depressed. Well, of course, if I gave you a death sentence, it would probably not make you feel very good. So this was one of the aspects of HIV and AIDS, was that these individuals were very, very upset with what they were. Some of the their prognosis was very, very poor. But the other problem was that we started treating them with drugs, and some of those drugs caused even worse depression. And one of the things we're going to see is that the compliance with the medical regimen is only like 25%. And you would think, well, geez, this is the only way that you can survive, yet you're only taking this 25% of the time, or only 25% of the people are actually taking it. This doesn't make a lot of sense. And the answer is, well, there are a lot of factors, a lot of psychological factors that have to do with why these individuals were dying at such a rapid rate. They anticipated that once that if it ever spread from the gay community to another community, they wouldn't have the same results. But the reality is that when you got into the IV drug using community, we got the same results. When you got into the heterosexual community, we got exactly the same results. So is it, and we're not exactly sure if it's a cause and effect situation or not. It may have started out in the gay community where these individuals felt rejected, and for that reason, we're going to talk about social support, and they weren't getting any social support even from each other, and they were dying fairly readily. But once you got into the IV drug community, we were seeing exactly the same thing. Well, the other question we have to ask is, are they using drugs because they are depressed? Are they using drugs as a form of self-medication? And of course, the only people that can answer that are the individuals themselves. But unfortunately, we saw exactly the same thing. Then when it got into the heterosexual community, we were thinking, well, everything's going to change, but it didn't. And one of the reasons, or one of the arguments was that, well, why are these individuals either having sex with bisexual males or with IV drug users? And once again, we got pretty much the same answer. It was really kind of odd. So we're going to talk about some of this stuff, some of this research that has been done. And one of the things that we're going to see is that the mental health of the individual has a lot to do with how rapidly they decline. Until recently, we haven't really been able to discover a drug regimen that would actually defeat HIV. But now we have. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about AZT. AZT is really kind of an interesting drug. Its side effects are like the super flu. I mean, it's just really, really bad. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Stress, negative emotions, social isolation may influence the pace at which AIDS progresses. And of course, that's exactly what I was talking about in the gay community, in the drug-using community, and in the heterosexual community where they have contact with these other individuals. A lot of stress, there's a lot of negative emotions taking place, and they feel socially isolated. And this is a really serious problem. Did you get my email? No? Okay. Well, I sent you an email. Okay. I know, I'm as excited as you are, I'm sure. I rarely send out emails. And I can't get a text, but I do have my phone today. But I had to go home and get it.
Email straight. No, I get no.
Okay, so what's going on? AIDS progresses, and one of the problems, of course, is that we have all these negative things taking place. The stress and the negative emotions, of course, all this may alter the hormonal and immune environments that affect the resistance of host cells to the HIV. The more depressed you are, of course, the greater the decline of the T cells, and this is one of the things they found out. Pessimistic outlook, depression, negative beliefs about self are all linked with a decline in T cells. You can take this one to the bank. As far as all mental illnesses are concerned, the more negative you are about things, the more immunocompromised you're going to be. It doesn't have to have anything to do with HIV, doesn't have to have anything to do with anything else. The more negative you are, the greater the decline of your T cells. And this is just a common situation. So the more positive you are, the less likely that you're going to get sick. I was talking to Dr. Wolf the other day. She just came down with a really bad cold, and I told her, well, I never get sick. Of course, she said, oh, everybody gets sick. Oh. And I told her, no, I never get sick. And I told her the reason was because I understand where disease comes from, and I know how to keep my immune system strong, and you do that with just positive ideas. I know. Oh, did you walk the stairs?
Oh, she ditched me.
But she does that all the time, doesn't she?
Hey, hold on, wait. I did too much wind guns for a year.
Oh, yeah, that must be it.
So, but I think it's a good thing that happened. Good one, though. It's a good one.
Are you
You walk
crying?
the stairs too or no?
Are you crying? Are you crying?
No,
I see tears in your eyes. It must be the wind. It must be the wind.
I should, though.
Yeah. See, he's wiping the tears.
I had to walk across because remember last time I caught you doing
Oh,
it?
sure.
So I had to do the same thing. That's a good method, you know.
Yeah.
Catch your breath and go to.
Of course, I just walk up the stairs. I don't play games with going back.
Yeah. You're halfway there already. You messed up.
When you're my age and you're in as good a shape as I am, maybe you'll be able to do it. He's a cross-country guy. Not only that, you're here. Everybody's bragging about what I did. You are you won a national championship in cross country.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. And you were all
JC, they were all American.
right, all American. He was an all American. I was an all American. Yeah, congratulations.
That was 8K, and then the other one was marathon.
Oh, yuck.
Yeah.
We don't even want to think about
Yeah,
marathons.
6 marathons. And when it gets to 7th, oh boy, I couldn't finish my 7th one. So, but this day and age in this world,
Yeah?
it hurts. My knees, ankle.
I'm
VR
VR.
for full marathon was 117. That's
I don't even have this. Bad knee, bad ankles. Marathons. That's a crazy race.
And it was all asphalt. The other one was all road.
That'll eat your knees and ankles right up. I don't know how they run that Boston Marathon. It's all on asphalt.
Yeah.
That's nuts. I don't know. Maybe. Is that Geronimo on your chest?
Yeah.
I've been reading about Geronimo. You know they didn't like him.
Yeah.
Well, his own people didn't like him. What does it say?
Heroes will always kill cowboys.
Or people from Indiana. Okay.
Never retreat, never surrender.
Yeah, okay, there we go. Well, who can argue that? Wait a minute, he did surrender.
This is take Bruce's
Yeah, he died. He died isolated in Fort Sill. Nobody wanted to be around him. He was too negative. And of course, we're talking about being negative, aren't we? We're talking about negativity causing immunocompromise. Psychological inhibition is linked to more rapid development of cancer and other chronic illnesses. So we can take that one to the bank as long as we stay positive, and we need to stay as positive as we possibly can. That will boost our immune system, just being happy. And if you can't be happy just wandering around the house, watch a comedy. Watch something that makes you laugh, makes you smile, or do something that makes you smile. That will boost your immunity. As odd as that sounds, all you have to do is smile, or all you have to do is laugh, and it actually helps your immunity. Thorell et al. In 1995 found that HIV-positive patients who reported greater social isolation and less emotional support showed a significantly greater decline in T cells over a 5-year study. So what we're really talking about here is trying to maintain a positive attitude and getting as much emotional support as possible. Come on. See, Marius did this to me again. He keeps taking this thing apart. Now it's even worse than it was before. Anyway. All right. I'll stop complaining. So what am I doing? Okay, so they did a 5-year study, and what they discovered was the more social support they got, the less decline of T cells that they had. Galvin et al. In 2008 found that social support, particularly from peers, is a critical factor in the progression of HIV and AIDS. One of the problems with homosexuality back in the 80s and 90s was the fact that a lot of people were being rejected by their families. So they were being thrown out of families. The fathers, mothers, grandparents didn't want to have anything to do with them, the brothers and sisters. So they had to create their own communities, and their own communities, of course, were communities of other gay individuals. As long as they were part of their community and were receiving social support, it actually helped them. Even if delivered over the internet, social support can improve the individual's chances for survival. So all you need to do is have somebody that you can talk to, or have somebody that will interact with you, even if it's on the internet. There we go. My friend who died of a heart attack, he stopped communicating with me after the election, and a year and a half later he was dead. Do you think if he kept communicating? That's a hint and a warning to you guys. Be nice to me.
Vote for the wrong guy.
Well, he voted for whoever he voted for, and then he didn't want to have anything more to do with me. Until recently, HIV infections were almost always a progressive fatal disease. The heart regimen, highly active antiretroviral therapy has prolonged survival, and one of those medications is AZT. AZT was the first anti-HIV drug that they came up with. Unfortunately, it has many side effects, and the side effects are fairly debilitating. Nausea, vomiting, fatigue, depression. It was one of the side effects of AZT, and as we know, the more depressed you are, the less likely that you're going to be able to survive for an extended period of time. And unfortunately, they were treating all of these AIDS patients with AZT. AZT is often combined with protease inhibitors, which block production of mature viral proteins. Now they have a new regimen. It still includes AZT. And for this reason, of course, there are a lot of individuals that say, well, we need to legalize marijuana so all these AIDS people can smoke pot and make them feel better when they're on their AZT regimen. And of course, the reality is there's not that many of them. Well, we won't get into whether we need to legalize marijuana or not. AZT is expensive, unfortunately. It's extremely expensive. So at least somebody gets to make money AIDS patients have poor adherence to regimen, as I was telling Edison before. Only about 25% will, 25% stop therapy within the first year. If you stop therapy, you're dead. You're dead. You might as well just cash it in. I mean, there's no way that you can survive. If you stop therapy, of course, the AIDS virus will get into your T cells. If you don't have any T cells, you don't have the immune system. If you don't have the immune system, first thing that comes down the pike, you're dead. And that's just the way it works. And 25% of these individuals are going off of their AIDS regimen the first year. So this is relatively common. One intervention to promote HIV adherence is dynamic tailoring. The delivery of individualized health messages over multiple time period to provide unique feedback based on the patient's statuses. I was just reading an article about actually doing full body massages for these select individuals. That's why I made that mistake. I apologize, but the hands-on contact is very important. People touching each other is pretty important as far as AIDS is concerned. Remember, the more social support they get, the more they feel connected to somebody else, the more likely that they can keep their T cells up. This can be done using social media, texting, or emailing to show that there is someone out there who cares about their welfare. Of course, the biggest problem that we saw in the beginning with the HIV problem had to do with the fact that they had been rejected by their own families. So these individuals were making no contact at all with their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, or sisters. All of these individuals had rejected them, which is very unfortunate. And they need as much social support as they possibly can get. Doctors have a number of potent anti-HIV drugs at their disposal. Unfortunately, most of them are very expensive. These widely used drugs block specific steps in the HIV life cycle. And as you can see, the life cycle has 5 different steps. So you can block it at any juncture if you possibly can. We're going to talk about prevention of HIV. Psychosocial interventions. Primary prevention involves counseling people to be tested for HIV and changing their high-risk behaviors. The earlier that you can get a hold of this stuff, it's just like any disease, especially it's like a cancer. The earlier you can get it, the more likely that you're going to be able to knock it out. Of course, the best way to do this is to not ever contract HIV to begin with. Does that mean abstinence? No, it doesn't. It just means condom use, and of course, that is one of the ways that they are trying to prevent HIV is by promoting condom use, especially in the gay community, because it's quite prevalent in the gay community. Secondary prevention includes helping AIDS patients cope with emotional and cognitive disturbances and conducting bereavement therapy for those in the last stages of their illness. They tend to, let's see, how can I explain this? Can I talk about people dying? Do you mind? Or will you need a ceremony? We won't need a ceremony. You're going to be okay? Okay. You guys are going to be okay. Okay, this is what happens when people die. One of the things that happens if you've been around somebody as they were dying, a lot of times what will happen is that they'll go inside themselves. What did we used to call it? Terminal drunk. That's what we used to call it, terminal drunk. Where they stop interacting with other individuals, and they're mostly concentrating on keeping themselves alive. So they go within themselves. And it's a form of grief. It's a form of bereavement. They're actually grieving for the fact that now they know that they're going to die. They're no longer going to die, and they will die. Well, people with HIV and AIDS, sometimes this will start a year before they actually die, because they know they're going to die. They've been given the prognosis. They've gone off their medication. They know that their immune system is going to get bad. They don't know when they're going to die, but they go into this bereavement stage, and usually it just accelerates the process. which is okay. Well, I can't even talk about that. Okay. Which is okay because they're going to die anyway. So most people, I've watched thousands of people die, strangely. Most people choose when they're going to go. They can fight it off as long as they want to, and then they accept it, and then they go. They're gone. It's a relatively painless process from what I've seen. Yes, sir, you bring it.
So, experiencing 1,000 passing. Where do you think we'll go after this?
Oh, it's not my business.
I know, but this, what do you think? Bruce?
What do I think? I don't care. They're gone. I don't have to. I don't have to work with them anymore. They're gone. It's none of my business. It's none of my business. They can go anywhere they
Do you
want.
think they go to heaven or?
It's none of my business, like I said. They can go anywhere they want. As long as, well, actually, I still had to mess with them because we had to get them all cleaned up and send them down to the ward. Half the time I was working in the ward, so I was the one that was accepting them. So they go to the ward. I can tell you exactly where they go. They go to the ward, okay?
Have you ever experienced one passed away and woke back up a couple of minutes later?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we were working, lady in ICU. She was in her 30s, and she kept winking in and out. She kept dying and coming back, and dying and coming back. Of course, yeah, like, exactly. That's what I kept saying. And of course, anytime somebody has a cardiac arrest or whatever, we try to save it. I mean, that was my job. That was one of my jobs. So yeah, this lady kept dying and coming back and dying and coming back. And for some reason, they wanted blood gases on this lady who kept dying. Anyway, so I started drawing blood gases from her. And they're going, they're watching the whole time. I'm just trying to get the damn blood. Sorry. I'm just trying to get the blood, so I got the needle in her arm, in her artery. We're not messing around with veins here. And I'm getting blood, and everything's fine, and I'm all done. And they said, well, she's been dead for 3 minutes. I'm going, well, how in the world did they get the blood? Your heart stops beating. That's how they knew that she was dead. And I was still getting the blood. They thought it was a miracle. But she came back after that. I know. Yeah. And then I had to go back up and draw blood gases from her again.
She went out of you.
Yeah. No, she's alive this time. Her heart wasn't supposed to be beating, so she shouldn't have had any blood pressure. So my syringe shouldn't fill up. I shouldn't have gotten any blood, but I did. I got all 5 cc. I'm so proud of myself. Yeah. And they were making fun of me because they thought I was, God. No, God. They thought I was God. The doctors. And they were all laughing at me. That's not nice. I just wanted to get the blood and get out of there. That's, you give me a job to do and I get it done, and then you make fun of me because I did it? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, yeah, so I've seen a lot of people die. Where do they go? I don't care. But I can tell you that they go to the morgue. Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. Okay, yeah, we'll see you later. I know where you're going. So I can tell you where Sheldon went, but I can't tell you where people that died. That's their, like I said, that's their own business, and it's none of my business. Anyway, okay, psychosocial interventions are often based on social cognitive theory, which involves reciprocally determined relationships among environmental events, internal processes, and behavior. Part of that involves perceived social norms regarding peer acceptance of HIV risk-reducing behaviors, self-efficacy beliefs, controlling one's thoughts and emotions, and social skills like the ability to respond assertively in negotiating risky behaviors. So what are we talking about as far as negotiating risky behaviors? We're talking about individuals that will only have sex with using condoms. That's what we're really talking about. Okay. Educational programs are most likely to be effective when messages are adapted to the target group. These include messages that focus on culturally relevant themes such as cultural pride and family responsibility. And we see this, they've actually done this with HIV prevention in inner city groups, aiming advertisements toward Hispanic communities, toward African American communities, toward white communities and whatnot. My son used to live in a Dominican neighborhood. And if you think that Dominicans are anything like Cubans or anything like Mexicans or anything like Venezuelans, then you're wrong. Dominicans are completely different. Which he found just fascinating because he speaks Spanish. So he used to speak with these people. He used to talk to them all the time. They liked him for some reason, I have no idea why. But they liked the kid, and they used to watch his truck because he'd park his truck on the side on the road, and they would protect his truck. They would let gangs come and strip it or do write graffiti all over it. It was really kind of an interesting situation. But and he explained this to me. In the Dominican community, it was completely different. Homosexuality was more acceptable in the Dominican community. I think that was 90. So this was right at the beginning when they first started advertising or putting ads up, trying to get people to practice safe sex. And he found it really kind of interesting because he had been out in. He'd been in New York City. This was in New Jersey, but he'd been in New York City. He'd been in Denver. He'd been in Los Angeles, and he said the advertisements were completely different. These people were far more accepting of the need to stop this risky sexual behavior. So he said he found it really fascinating. And I'll show you some pictures. These aren't actually from the Dominican community, but I'll show you some pictures of some of the things that they did to advertise you need to use condoms in just a second. There are a number of simple precautions that will protect against AIDS and other sexually transmitted infections. Health experts offer the following specific precautions. One of them, of course, is stay sober so that you can say no, or so that you can say, put that damn condom on. Avoid anal intercourse. Be selective in choosing your partners. And that also has to do with staying sober. Use latex condoms, of course. Never share needles with somebody else. And don't become complacent about AIDS and sexually transmitted diseases. It only takes one time. As my friend very well knows, I had a student up in Montana who shared a needle one time, and now she has hepatitis C from that one episode of sharing her needle when she was drunk. Comprehensive interventions focusing on HIV help people who are HIV positive to live with the infection. A study by Antoni et al. In 2000. Of course, that was almost 20 years ago, but this study was done 20 years ago. HIV positive men received a 10-week cognitive behavioral stress management intervention consisting of relaxation training, cognitive restructuring to identify and to change cognitive distortions, techniques to improve coping skills, and manage anger and aerobic exercise. Those in the intervention group reported significantly lower anxiety and depression than those in the control group. Now remember, when you contract HIV and AIDS, the more depressed you are, the more anxious you are, the more depressed your immune system is. And of course, this is a really serious problem. So here they were using this 10-week cognitive behavioral management course, and they were actually lowering their depression and lowering their anxiety. And by doing that, of course, they made it more likely that the individual would survive from the HIV infection or never develop the AIDS, never develop AIDS. They also displayed significantly stronger immune functioning, of course, which included increases in their T cells and their NK cells, their natural killer cells. HIV counseling attempts to counteract the emotionally intense, rushed nature of many sexual encounters that is not conducive to clear thinking and negotiating about safe sex. This is especially prevalent in the gay community. If you know anything about the bathhouses or any of their encounters, a lot of them are very, very quick, relatively rushed. Sometimes they can have episodes in a bathroom over a number of minutes. And for that reason, of course, this is not the best way to interact with somebody sexually. HIV counseling teaches young men and women to exercise self-control and how to resist coercive sexual pressure. And of course, a lot of times, the sex in the bathroom thing has to do with being coerced to have sex in the bathroom. These are the pictures I was talking about. Very positive. These are very positive pictures. Of course, this is a dress made out of condoms, and this is a hat made with condoms in it. These are the kinds of things you run into in the Dominican neighborhood because the Dominicans are so realistic about homosexuality. Anyway, condom use can protect both parties from HIV, of course. It shows concern for your partner's well-being, and it provides variety in your sex life, I guess, if you're, depending on what kind of condom you're using or whatever. Anyway, that was, let me see if I can get this. Those condoms are, oh, there it goes. Yeah. Whose fault is this? Marius's, right? Okay. I just want you to know. Okay, there we go. Yeah, rainbow color of condoms, as you can see. Aggressive condoms. Research findings have shown a strong association between perceived self-efficacy and condom use among college students, gay men, African American teenagers, and Hispanic women. Research also shows a relationship between self-efficacy, outlook on life, and the tendency to engage in high-risk sexual behaviors. Gay males with high self-efficacy tend to have fewer sex partners and have greater knowledge of the sexual history of the people with whom they are intimate. In other words, they are aware of how many partners their partner has had. Research findings by Carvajal et al. In 1998 showed that inner-city minority adolescents who were more optimistic about, were more confident with their ability to practice safe sex. Morrill et al. In 1996 found that women who avoided unprotected intercourse had more favorable attitudes toward condoms and a greater internal locus of control regarding their health. So the more self-assured they are, the more they understand who they are, the more likely they are to practice safe sex. We talk about safe sex all the time, and everybody's going, what? This is an odd thing to talk about. But the reality, this is exactly what we're talking about. Condom use and not getting drunk and having sex with whoever happens to be in the bathroom at the time. Helping people improve their outlook on life, feelings of self-efficacy and sense of personal control should be the focus of interventions, of course. So we're trying to build people's self-esteem. We're trying to build their self-image. And that will help them fight off some of these problems. Oh, let me see if this works. Nope, it's not going to work. Okay.
You know how I know we're not in the Matrix?
No, how do you know? Okay. Anyway, okay. Research studies. Wait a minute. Let me try this. Nah, that's okay. That's okay. It's just a episode of The Big Bang Theory, where Leslie says that she's gotten to a point in her life where waking up on a futon with strangers is not the way she wants to go anymore. And so she wants to start dating Leonard. And of course he's complimented and then he's confused. So that's as interesting as that is. Research studies reveal that many college students would lie about their sexual history to obtain sex, usually reducing or eliminating their contacts altogether. The reality is men are the biggest liars. No, that's not true. Women are liars too. Normally, if you ask a man how many times he's had sex, normally if he's bragging, he will multiply it times 3. It's the famous 3 factor. If you're talking to women and she's not bragging about how many partners she's had, she'll divide it by 3. So this is one of the old rules. I don't know if it still applies in the 21st century, but in the old days that was pretty close to being true. What are we talking about this? Oh, anyway, so men will lie about their sexual contacts. They may even call themselves a virgin just to get into somebody's britches. That's just the way it works. They're liars. Men are liars. I'm not sure women are liars. I don't know. I haven't dated in almost 50 years, so I'm not exactly sure. Well, I haven't dated in 40 years, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on now. They weren't, maybe they are now. Okay, so Tara says that they are, so I'll believe you. I'll believe you that women are liars as well. AIDS is having a wide and varied effect on legal systems. In some states, persons who knowingly transmit any STD are guilty of a misdemeanor. In others, a felony. It's a felony, and it's known as, you have to make partner notification. In other words, if you contract AIDS, you have to contact all your partners. I was working in Omaha. This is just before I lost my spleen. Is that right? Right after I lost my spleen. I had 2 gay guys that were working for me. And one of them was kind of a troublemaker, and he was in a bar, and he thought it was a gay bar, and it turned out not to be. So he got in a fight, and the police came and arrested him. And of course, they arrested him, but they didn't arrest the other guys that he was fighting with. And he got upset, and so he spit on the police, and they charged him with assault. This is in Omaha. It was really kind of odd. It wasn't in Omaha, it was actually outside of Omaha. It was in Elkhorn. Anyway, they charged him with assault. And in Nebraska, of course, these are all misdemeanors. Well, they threw him in jail. He was supposed to work that night. And guess who had to work for him? That's the only reason I remember this story, because I had to work for him. And they kept him in jail for a week. So guess who had to cover all his shifts? Well, that's the worst part. And finally, they let him out of jail. They had to get a HIV test back before they let him out of jail because, well, I don't know. He looked gay, or actually, he told them that he was gay. Oh, no, I moved that from the All right. The guy that worked for me. Effective interventions are those that target high-risk behavior among at-risk individuals. So he would be an at-risk individual because he was gay. So we were looking at high-risk behavior. We need to teach specific skills to reduce risk. We need to promote communication skills necessary to maintain lower-risk sexual relationships. We need to address social and cultural norms that surround sexual activity. And of course, there are a lot of cultures that don't want to talk about sex, ever. We just don't want to talk about it. We don't want to be realistic about it. We want to pretend that it doesn't exist. And this is the way it was in the Victorian world. They didn't want to talk about sex at all. They didn't even want to talk about limbs. They didn't talk about chair legs. Legs was too provocative, so they started calling chair legs limbs. And well, just not legs, because then men would get the idea, and then they would think of women's legs, and then they get all sexually excited. You know, that kind of stuff always happens when somebody mentions the word legs, or arms, or wrists, or whatever. Now, potentially, if you talk about something else, I mean, obviously that would cause. But anyway, so they needed to deal realistically with this. Now the reality is, I was born in 1949. I grew up in the 1950s, grew up in the 1960s. So when I first started in this in psychology, we weren't allowed to even use the word sex unless we were talking about Freud. And then when we talk about sex, we weren't really supposed to talk about the sex act. We were just allowed to use the word sex, maybe. And of course, from time to time, you get in trouble for just saying the word sex. Little girls would get all nervous and they'd get all apoplectic about it. And then they would complain that somebody was saying something provocative, which doesn't make any sense at all. I think it's better to be realistic. Dan and I used to be in the military, and we had to deal with this all the time. I told you all my stories about all the HIV, not the HIV, but all the gonorrhea and syphilis that we were dealing with. You got to be realistic about it, otherwise it's not going to go away. Otherwise you can't control it unless you talk about it realistically. Focus on improving self-esteem and feelings of self-efficacy, address faulty thinking, involve coordinated community-level education. You need to be realistic, and this is one of the reasons why in select areas where HIV and STIs are relatively common, those areas will hand out condoms in the high schools. Well, people are so appalled that they're handing out condoms, as if they're inviting people to have sex. That's not what's happening. They're trying to keep these individuals from contracting the disease. That's all they're trying to do. And it's very realistic. It's far more realistic than pretending that sex doesn't occur. Sex occurs with just practically everybody. And if it's a male, I can assure you that whether he's having sex with somebody else or just by himself, he's having sex. So, and that's the males. Females, I have no clue about it. I don't understand women. I've been married too many times. Women tell me things and I only believe it half the time, especially my wives. I can't believe anything they tell me. Anyway, despite massive educational efforts, rates of condom use and other safer sex behaviors are low. Media depictions of sexual encounters do little to promote interventions aimed at promoting safe sex. And actually, well, I don't know. I don't really watch that. I don't watch the Playboy channel on television. Now that he's dead, I'm not exactly sure if the Playboy channel even still exists. Do they still publish Playboy? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know either. It's really kind of an oddity. Anyway, so I'm not exactly sure how they are depicting things. Normally they don't show two people having sex, and if they do, they don't show their sexual parts. Not in a regular movie. I haven't watched a XXX movie since I was a teenager, since I was in the military. Since last week. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure if they show sex parts, but if they show somebody's penis, I guess they would need to show a condom on that penis. But I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know what they're doing with. Misconceptions in HIV/AIDS are common. For example, that the danger of infection depends on the depth of the relationship with one's partner, and of course that's not true at all. There is a lot of AIDS and HIV that's being spread with casual contact between people. When I say casual contact, I'm talking about casual sexual contact, not just shaking hands with somebody and saying hi. That's not going to spread anything, but any casual sexual contact. Okay. Optimistic bias and perceived invincibility are relatively common. It's never going to happen to me. It's going to happen to somebody else, but this will never happen to me. AIDS complacency. Women involved in casual sexual relationships are 11 times more likely than women in more committed relationships to maintain safer sexual behaviors. Okay, so women are smart, are a lot smarter than men are, obviously, because men in a casual sexual relationship, they just want to get it over with as fast as they possibly can, but women are more likely to protect themselves. A lot of the individuals that made XXX movies back in the 70s and 80s are now dead. Most of them are dead from HIV. Most of them have died from HIV. Charlie Sheen has HIV. And that may be because he had so much promiscuous and unprotected sex. Sensation-seeking personality, subjective reinforcement of unprotected anal intercourse strongly predicts condom use among gay and bisexual men. And of course, that's according to Kelly and Kalikman in 1998. Why is anal intercourse so dangerous? Why is it so dangerous? There must be a reason. Well, we keep talking about anal intercourse as if it's something dangerous. Why would it be dangerous? If somebody's got AIDS, if the guy's got it, or if the person doing the penetrating has AIDS, and he's having intercourse with somebody else, whether it's male or female, why is it anal intercourse so dangerous? There must be a reason. Why do we even talk about it? Actually, it's only slightly more dangerous than other types of intercourse. Why?
Because it's more prone to tear, because like if you're looking at vagina, there's lubrication there.
Exactly, there's lubrication.
Whereas
They're anal just, unless you provide it
Yes.
superficially with another means. Not only that, but the vagina is normally, the sphincter around the vagina is normally open. The anus, of course, has a sphincter that keeps you from squirting every time you pass gas. It's a sphincter, okay? It's closed up. It's normally closed up. In order for somebody to have intercourse with somebody anally, they have to open that sphincter up. Or they, you can't just go, oh, geez, I wish my sphincter were open. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to either force it open or you have to use something else. In this case, nitrous oxide works. Poppers. You can use poppers, and poppers will open that sphincter up. Of course, it also lowers the blood pressure. So if somebody has a heart condition, you give them a popper, then potentially they'll die of a heart attack right there, which shouldn't stop you at all, I guess. It have to stop you. But that's necrophilia, of course. And anyway, and that's the reason why. And that's why we keep talking about anal intercourse. They have just recently done a study, like over the last couple of years, and what they discovered was that oral intercourse can cause a problem because with ripping and tearing in the mouth, of course, that can potentially cause a problem as well. But anal intercourse, almost always, there is some degree of tearing taking place. Opened. What are we talking about? We're talking about mucous membrane. Yeah. So, impact on the individual, it increases the stigma of AIDS, of course. Acknowledging the possibility of dying young, and of course this is one of the tragedies of not only being in the military, but also with contracting AIDS. Most of these individuals aren't in their 70s and 80s. The vast majority of them are in their 20s and 30s. So they're dying young. Depressive, suicidal thoughts are relatively common, especially among those who feel a withdrawal of family and social support. And of course, this is the biggest problem with the rejecting family, is the fact that if this individual contracts AIDS, they will die. I grew up in an area that had a relatively large number of gays in our area. And of course, we didn't even live in a town, we lived down in the country. And the next farmstead over, one of the individuals was gay, and the next farmstead over, one of the individuals was gay, and over on the other side there were at least 4 or 5 individuals that were gay in our area. And the strange thing was, are you ready for this? There were 3 children in each of those families. That was the odd part. There were 3 children in the families, and one of the individuals was gay. It was really weird. So I looked at all of these people around us that had 3 children in their family, and one of the individuals was gay, and I thought, well, maybe it's the oldest person in the family. But no, sometimes it was the first one, sometimes it was the second child, sometimes it was the third one. Maybe it was the males. Nope, there were 5 families around us, 3 of them had gay males and 2 of them had gay females, as interesting as that was. But of those 5 families, 3 of the individuals died of AIDS. As sad as that is. They were all male. All the males were the ones that died of AIDS. And none of the females, of course. But then again, they don't contract AIDS as readily as the males do. All 3 of those individuals died alone. And the reason they died alone is because they were rejected by their families. The one kid, he was living in his mother's house. His mother and his father had just died. He contracted AIDS, and his mother went on a world cruise around the world. And before she got back, he died. But she knew he had AIDS before she left. But she left to get rid of it, or to get away from it. As sad as that sounds, anyway, he died of AIDS. My mother, they were our next door neighbors, and they were my brother's best friend. He was my brother's best friend. And my mother said that if she knew that he had AIDS, that she would have gone down and taken care of him. But of course, he didn't tell anybody. This was back in the 80s. When people didn't talk about it. Okay, not all patients who have HIV positive, who are HIV positive, develop psychological problems. Maintaining physical fitness by engaging in regular exercise is one way to survive, or to at least build up your immunocompetence. Aerobic exercise especially will bolster your immunocompetence. Keeping an upbeat, positive outlook, as I said before. AIDS progresses more rapidly among the chronically depressed. Avoiding social isolation, having a large social network is positively correlated with longevity as far as AIDS is concerned. AIDS changes the family structure and roles, often reversing developmental patterns. AIDS can have a profound impact on the surviving partner, whether the partner is male or female. AIDS has a powerful impact on the psychological and physical health of long-term caregivers. And of course, this is one of the things that we have to be careful of. It's one of the reasons I'm kind of happy that my mother didn't find out that Sonny had AIDS. She might have gone down there, and it might have depressed her. She was the toughest lady that you can possibly imagine, but watching somebody die that was so young potentially might have done her damage psychologically. Okay, what am I doing? What am I doing? Okay, that's all we're going to talk about as far as AIDS are concerned. How much more time do we have? How much longer will we be able to talk to each other this semester? Well, this is the 13th week. Next week's 14th, and then the 15th week. There's 4 more lectures after today, so that's it. That's all we've got. So the question is, how far can I get in the chapter, in the textbook? I'll probably get through 13. Maybe I'll get through 14, but that's about as far as I'm going to be able to get. So those of you who are thinking about getting all your stuff in, please. Okay, here's the deal. This is what's going to happen. I have to turn the grades in on the 14th. On the 13th, I have to go get my wife. I have 2 cars down here. I have a snow car, and I have I'm sorry? My wife is flying in to drive one of the cars home, and she'll probably drive the snow car with the dog in it. But I have to pick her up on the 13th. Late at night, like 8 o'clock at night. So please get things in before the 13th. I may not be able to get to it. I may not be able to grade it because I won't be able to grade anything on the 13th. I think grades are due like at 8:30 in the morning on the 14th. So you really need to get stuff in by the 12th. And even if you get things in by the 12th, if you get like everything in on the 12th, that means I've got to grade everything, and I'll probably be pretty pissed off. So, I'm a fairly easygoing guy, but when I have to do a lot of work at the end of the semester, I kind of get upset. Even I get upset. So that's a hint and a warning. Try to get everything in as quickly as you can. The final is online, so you don't have to worry about that. So that whole week of the finals week, I'll be working on grading things. So please get things in. I was telling everybody, they were saying, they were asking me, when do I have to have my paper in? We'll try to get it in by May. If you can't get it in by May, I'll give you a couple extra days, but I don't know how much I can, if everybody does that. In this class, I've had one paper turned in, so, and there's like 13 of them. I don't know how many. Anyway, just a hint and a warning. The more I have to do at the end of the semester, the grouchier I get, and the meaner I get. So just take that as a warning. Sometimes I like people, and sometimes I don't. I just flunk people for the fun of it. Right, Edison? Yeah, okay. See, Edison's one of the guys I like. Anyway, I'll try to be good. I'll try to be happy. It's just like the an AIDS infection. The more depressed I am, the meaner I get. Okay. The less likely I'm going to survive. I'll try to survive. Okay. Really? Yeah, Crystal. She's actually the only one that's turned in her paper. It's Crystal. Anyway, okay, so we're going to talk about the role of health psychology in healthcare settings. If you're a nurse, you understand what I'm talking about. If you're a doctor, you understand what I'm talking about. If you work in a hospital, you understand what I'm talking about. If you've never worked in any of those places, you're going, what the hell are you talking about? Collaborative care is a cooperative form of healthcare in which physicians, psychologists, and other healthcare providers join forces to improve patient care. With Obamacare or with the Affordable Care Act, one of the things that happened was that the individual that they forced doctors to actually interact with their patients, which was kind of irritating to a lot of doctors. The other thing that they asked the doctors to do was to collaborate with psychologists, with other healthcare workers, especially psychologists. What they were trying to do was they were trying to prevent individuals who were depressed from not being diagnosed with depression, because a lot of times MDs do not notice these things, whereas a psychologist might. Most doctors balked at this, and most doctors continue to balk at this, mainly because, for one thing, they're hoping that Obamacare will be repealed. That's one reason. But the other reason is because they don't like to talk to other people about their diagnoses. They don't even like to talk to the nurses. Sometimes they'll talk to the nurses. It all depends on the doctor. The new doctors, the doctors that are coming out of medical school, or who have come out of medical school over the past 5 or 10 years, these individuals are more interactive than any doctors we've ever had in the past. A lot of times in the past, you couldn't get a doctor to even call another doctor on the phone. Anyway, so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get these doctors to interact with different points of view in order to make sure that this individual gets the best care they possibly can get. The criteria that people use to recognize and interpret symptoms vary. Attentional focus is a person's characteristic style of monitoring bodily symptoms, emotions, and overall well-being. I told you some stories where it looked like I was the hero. The reality was I was just seeing things from a different perspective. I told you the story of the young girl that had diarrhea so bad that she was hours away from pooping herself to death, and I was the one that discovered what was causing her diarrhea. But the reality was that there were a lot of individuals that were dealing with this. There were nurses, there were doctors, there were other laboratory technicians, there were x-ray techs, there were all these people, just masses of nurses that had seen this individual, and they all had their own perspective. Most of their perspectives were very, very similar, because that's the way you're taught. You're taught to look at a patient this way, and you interpret what their symptoms this way. And most of the people were looking at it from that point of view. As a laboratory technician, and as kind of a goofy guy, I looked at things a little bit differently. And because of that, I was able to see beyond what the textbook told me I was supposed to be seeing. It had to do with my perspective. It just had to do with my perspective. In most cases, I would not have been able to figure out what was wrong with that individual. But in this case, of course, because my perspective was completely different than everybody else's, I was able to diagnose what this person's problem was. So we need people looking at things from different perspectives. That way we get the best possible diagnosis. A good example is, and I told you that my wife's going to have both of her hips replaced over the summer. She's had this problem for 5 years. She started having this problem after she was in a Bradley vehicle accident in Korea back in 1994. Yeah, 1994. The thing turned over. I keep saying flipped over, but these things can't flip. They're too heavy. But so it turned over. And she landed on several of her body parts. She had to have her vertebra fused in her neck. She had carpal tunnel surgery in both of her wrists, but she landed on her wrists. The thing flipped over on one side, and then it was on a hill, so it rolled over on its top. Eventually, it rolled all the way back over, so it landed on its wheels, but that means that she hit once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. She hit 4 times. Is that right? Once, twice, no, 3 times. Twice, 3 times, 4 times. She hit 4 times. Anyway, and every time she hit something else. But one of the areas that she hit was her hip, one of her hips. And she landed on her neck, and she caught herself with her wrists. She caught herself on her elbows before the time. Anyway, when she landed on her hip, of course, it was her right hip. So when she started walking, of course, she stayed in the military until 2001, she was walking incorrectly. She was favoring her right hip, and because she did that, she was messing up her left hip at the same time. So when they started looking at her, and when she started complaining about the pain in her back, she thought it was in her back, they diagnosed her with all kinds of things. I mean, just all kinds of things. And it took until, and she had x-rays, she had MRIs done, she had CAT scans done, and we were dealing with this over 5 years. But we had already fused her vertebra in her neck. We'd already done the carpal tunnel on her wrists. She had female military syndrome, where women have to carry their purses on their left shoulders. So they have all their, they have this black purse, and it's right here on their shoulder. And so it always has to be on the left shoulder so that they can salute. So she had that problem, and of course that had something to do with the problem in her neck. But the diagnosis, of course, took a number of years, and now, of course, she has to have both of her hips replaced. And it's mainly because, all the misdiagnoses had to do with the fact that people were looking at it from their own point of view. She'd go to a pain specialist, and of course the pain specialist focuses on where the pain is, or not where the pain is coming from, but what it's doing and how we can block it. She went to an arthritis specialist, and he said, well, I think you've got arthritis in both hips. Every time she went in to see somebody, they said, yeah, this is the problem. But actually what they were talking about were the symptoms. They weren't really talking about the root cause and what was going to have to be done to correct it. Nobody was talking about what was needed to be done to correct it. Every time she went into the pain specialist, he blocked the nerve that theoretically was causing the pain, and that worked for about 2 weeks. He gave her a stronger dosage of aspirin She wouldn't take opiates, which was probably, if she was taking opiates, she probably wouldn't be able to walk right now. Anyway, so we had all these people that were looking at the same thing and seeing something totally different. So how people recognize and interpret symptoms vary. It all depends on what their specialty is. Attentional focus is a person's characteristic style of monitoring bodily symptoms, emotions, and overall well-being. People with a strong internal focus are more likely to detect symptoms than people with a strong external focus. In other words, if you want to be sick, then potentially you're going to you will see the symptoms as causing a problem. Remember, I told you that I had a heart attack. I had the attack in the afternoon on one day, and I didn't actually go to the hospital until the next day. Here I am, I've seen thousands of heart attacks, and I had one myself, and I didn't recognize it. I mean, that's how bad it was. That's how stupid I am. I talk about how smart I am from time to time, but this time I'm telling you I did something stupid, okay? I did something real stupid. It could have killed me. I needed to go in right away, but I didn't recognize it as a heart attack. I thought it was pleurisy. Oh God, how stupid am I? Sensitizers are people who cope with health problems and other aversive events by closely scanning their bodies and environments for information. These are sensitizers. And the problem with sensitizers is very often they misidentify what their problem is. They identify something that is relatively common as something that is far more serious than it actually is. We used to call these people hypochondriacs. We don't anymore, but we used to call them hypochondriacs. Repressors are people who cope with health problems by ignoring or distancing themselves from stressful information. And of course, these individuals pretend that they don't have a problem, like the guy that was in the farming accident, jumped in the creek to wash the blood off of his legs, and then he went back and he finished plowing the field. Of course, he almost bled to death, came into the hospital with blood-soaked breeches, and the doctor called him all kinds of stupid, mainly because he laid down in a creek. Well, how clean is the water in a creek? Well, it all depends on who peed in it last, as to whether, or who took who defecated in that thing last. Probably all the sheep down the river, and all the cows that may happen to be down there, and maybe all the mice are urinating into it. Sounds tasty, doesn't it? How a person views a particular illness representations is how a person views a particular illness. Will it become their identity? And that is a question that you have individuals that develop HIV and AIDS. They identify with their disease, and this, of course, can be a problem. If you want to understand illness representations, then think about how people identify American Indians. If I was to say what are American Indians like in the United States, there's 5 million of them. Can anybody identify what they look like? One of the first words I may get from the medical community is what? American Indians. I can think of 2 words that they would use. And neither one of them is complimentary. And this is one of the reasons why I didn't want to, when I did my research with American Indians, I didn't want to focus on either of those problems. Because too many people identify American Indians with their problems, not with who they are. So I did mine on resilience. First word that comes to mind when I think of American Indians is resilient. Me, that's the way it works, but not with most people. What do they think of American Indians? What? Tell me. What's the word? We're all friends here. You can tell me. It's not going to be a surprise.
Poverty or alcoholic.
I was thinking, I was thinking. The other was diabetes. Or child abuse. Oh, jeez. These are all negative things. And of course, we shouldn't identify people by the problems, potential problems that they have. I know a lot of people, a lot of American Indians who aren't alcoholics. I know a couple. No. I can't think of anybody that I interact with that probably is. That's both here and there, both here in Montana. We had one guy that was the janitor. He was the janitor. He had alcoholic seizures. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody with alcoholic seizures, but from time to time he would have an epileptic seizure, and it was alcohol induced. As sad as that is, but actually he and his brother are the only two people. I think his brother has died, so he doesn't count. But that's the only person that I really interacted with. Just about everybody that I knew was a recovered alcoholic, if they had ever drunk at all. I don't know anybody here that drinks. For one thing, it's against the law. This is a dry reservation. I don't know if you knew that. It's a dry reservation up there too, but that doesn't seem to stop people. Or here, I guess. But I don't know anybody that's an alcoholic. And if you are, don't tell me, okay? Or if you know anybody in my classes that are, don't tell me who they are. Anyway, so it becomes your identity. Your illness can become your identity. They may identify themselves with their problem. The causes, they may think back to why they had the problem. They may think of themselves as, we all do, well, I don't know if we all do, but a lot of people think, well, how long am I going to live? I've been thinking about how long I was going to live since I was a kid. So I used to read the obituaries to find out how long people live. And I was thinking, that guy died in his 50s, I'm going to make it past that. Oh, that guy died in his 60s. See, I'm almost there. I'm almost in my 70s, so I've almost beat that guy. Anyway, I used to read the obituaries, and of course, we're thinking of timelines here. Consequences of your problem is another way to look at your disease. And controllability. What can I do to control this? Nobody wants to be sick. We all want to be normal. So what do I do to make myself more normal? What can I possibly do? Should I stop eating meat? Should I start taking medication? What can I possibly do to make myself better? Controllability. People who are anxious and those who score low on tests of emotional stability tend to report more physical symptoms. Comorbidity is the simultaneous occurrence of two or more physical and or psychological disorders or symptoms. And the reality is that diabetes is a cluster of symptoms. That's what we talk about, clusters of symptoms. And somebody with antisocial personality disorder, it's a cluster of symptoms. Somebody with, obsessive compulsive disorder, cluster of symptoms. Depression, cluster of symptoms. That's normally what we talk about, are the cluster of symptoms. And at one point during, I don't know, it was about 20 or 25 years ago, they stopped talking about diseases. They started talking about clusters. It confused everybody. Some brilliant guy came up with this idea, and they started talking about clusters. In psychology, and if you know anything about psychology and you look at the symptoms, my God, most of them look almost identical. I mean, they could be the same thing. And of course, if you look at the first abnormal psychology book that I have, it doesn't talk about diseases. It talks about clusters. It just drives you nuts because you can't look up schizophrenia because it's in like 17 different places in the book. It's just nuts. I learned absolutely nothing out of that textbook. As many as 1/3 of all hospitalized patients may suffer from a psychological disorder, and that is a tragedy. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time right here. I will get through this chapter. It's not very long. It's only 33 slides long, but I'll get through this chapter.